Appreciate it. And when we come back, Jason Johnson will join us from Georgia, where he is reporting on the latest efforts by Republicans to block the vote there, to deny thousands and thousands of people from being able to exercise their legal right to vote. And also later, what John Kelly said today about Elizabeth Warren, which of course confirms everything we already knew about John Kelly. We have breaking news tonight in what is truly developing as an election scandal in Georgia, where the Georgia NAACP is preparing to sue Secretary of State Brian Kemp in response to reports that his office has put on hold tens of thousands of voter registration applications before this coming election. Those are being held indefinitely. The Republican strategy for winning elections now in a country where they are outnumbered by Democrats and outnumbered by independents is to prevent Democrats from voting. That's why Republican state governments around the country have done everything they can to close voting locations that are easily accessible to Democrats and to simply kick Democrats off the voting rolls for any excuse they can find, and in many cases for no good or legal reason at all. Nowhere is this strategy of trying to win by preventing voting more glaring than in the Georgia governor's race this year, where the Republican Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, is running for governor. As Secretary of State, Brian Kemp has been, in effect, the top election official in the state of Georgia. And so, with his eyes on the prize of the governorship, Brian Kemp has for years been canceling the voter registrations of Democrats. He has canceled over 1.4 million voter registrations, and that's in a state that only has 6.4 million registered voters. Brian Kemp has gotten rid of 20% of the voters in Georgia. We have never seen a 20% voter purge of voters in a state. And now the Associated Press is reporting that Brian Kemp's office has simply seized and is holding 53,000 voter registration applications, which it might just hold and suppress forever. Brian Kemp's claimed justification for seizing these applications is his policy called exact match, which means if you leave out a middle initial in your name that is somehow already on file in some other record that the state has, then your voter registration application is not an exact match for the state's pre-existing information about you, and you are presumed to be a voting criminal, someone who's trying to falsely register and criminally register to vote, a phenomenon not known to actually exist in the United States. Brian Kemp knows where to find the Democrats who he doesn't want to vote in Georgia, and that is why 70% of the voter registration applications that Brian Kemp is blocking are from African-American voters in a state where African-American population is 32%. Brian Kemp is simply the most obvious of the grotesque, racist voter suppressors who believe voter suppression is necessary to Republican election victories. He is running against Stacey Abrams, who said this today. Feels like deja vu. 4 years ago, Kemp tried to keep 40,000 new voters off the rolls. It took a few years, but we beat him. A few months ago, he tried to close polling places, but we beat him there too. Now he's at it again, and we'll beat him again. We will work to process the 53,000, but we don't have to wait for justice. We've got 27 days of action, so we'll beat him in absentee ballots. We'll beat him at early voting starting October 15th, and we'll beat him on November 6th. Brian Kemp has called us out. Let's vote and let's get it done. Joining us now from Georgia, Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor, and Aisha Moodie-Mills, Democratic strategist and social impact advisor. Jason, what are you discovering as you report there in Georgia tonight?
I'm discovering that this is sort of a rehash of Eyes on the Prize. I was here 4 years ago, and I spoke to John Lewis, and he talked to me about this. He said this is what he saw in the 1960s. The difference is this, and I want everybody to understand. no matter what Brian Kemp is trying to do, no matter how many polling places he's trying to shut down, no matter how many new registrations he's trying to destroy, the Democratic Party here, the New Georgia Project, and the Abrams campaign anticipated this voter suppression. Their pathway to success was never dependent on new registrations, but they're going to fight just as hard as anybody else to make sure that everybody here can participate in the franchise.
Aisha, I want to take a look at the latest poll. This is a Survey USA poll, and it shows a statistical tie within the margin of error. Kemp at 47, Stacey Abrams at 45, and there's Stacey Abrams in a statistical tie in a race where the Democrat isn't really supposed to come close.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so let's just talk about the math here. This is what this is really about. It's about the math, and it's about her pathway to victory. She needs to get 90% of people of color in the state to vote for her, which is pretty easy because the majority of them are African American. She also, though, here's the interesting factor, needs, well, what Kemp needs is for her to not have any more than 40% of the electorate be people of color. This gets interesting because about 36% of Georgia is African American, and we're not even counting Latinos. So it's not coincidental then that Brian Kemp would want to keep new African Americans from being able to register, because the more people of color who are in the registration pool, it starts to tick the number up higher of the electorate that she can actually win in order to win the state. So there's a direct correlation between Stacey Abrams' path to victory and Brian Kemp's attempt to keep the voters that she needs from being able to vote. And it's just simple math.
Jason, give us the worst-case scenario here from the Democrats' perspective. If all 53,000 of those votes are not allowed to vote, can the turnout model be worked? Is there a turnout plan in place that can still deliver a victory margin for the Democrats?
Yeah, there is still a pathway to success, Lawrence. It's always been a thin path. This is a red state. And I've said all along, and I've talked to both Republicans and Democrats down here, look, the fact that Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams are tied 30 days out means Brian Kemp's actually losing. That's not a good sign in a red state where there should be a cakewalk for him. Here's the catch. For the Abrams campaign to actually win, not only do they have to have those numbers, they have to make sure that all the absentee ballots come in. They have to make sure that there's relatively high turnout, and they have to make sure that the men and women throughout the state in the rural areas are able to vote and participate. One important thing to understand about the state of Georgia is that there are lots of rural African Americans who are often not polled, not paid attention to. And there are many people here, there are some internal pollsters who I've talked to who have said, look, the black electorate might be upwards of 28, 29%. And if that's the case, and that those people aren't being voted, if those people aren't being polled, there's a good chance that Abrams can pull this off. Only if people participate, only if they vote, and only if people keep fighting against this kind of suppression, because this is not the only thing Brian Kemp is going to try and pull before November 6th.
Jason Johnson, thank you for joining us live from Georgia tonight. Aisha Moodie-Mills, please stay with us for another discussion coming up.